morning.
Morning.
That's a pretty good response on the final weekend of fall break. It was so cold this morning when I took Lola for a walk and my hands were cold. How about that? That tells us there's hope in store, and it also says ice is coming someday. I don't know. I live in Oklahoma, right? Hey, so really quickly, so we don't forget, tomorrow night is our monthly men's dinner, and this month again, like last month, it's at the Foster home, and you need to bring a drink, and if you want a specific side or dessert, you should bring that. But if you don't have Craig's address, he's sitting right back here in red. You can't miss him. And so make sure before you would leave this morning, he's cooking the meat. He's been slaving over this deal. He's excited to share his recipe with us. And so tomorrow evening, 6:30 at their place. And then just one more quick, this last Wednesday we took a group. There were about 12 of us, I think, that went, actually there were more than that, 13, 14 of us that went to MACU, Mid-American Christian University, and engaged their prayer labyrinth. For those of you who maybe aren't remembering, a prayer labyrinth is just a kind of historic way in which people kind of center themselves, not in kind of a new age way, but center themselves in Jesus and use this path that seems like a maze, but you don't get lost because there's one way in, one way out. It's intended to guide us. And we're going to take another trip this Wednesday. We leave at 6:30. We'll be back at 8. If you would like to go, we'd love for you to go. The church band is kind of a fun thing to be together. And we just had a great time. And so if you didn't go this past week, I hope that you would join us this week. And for those that went last week, it will just be a second week of great and a different prayer labyrinth in town. He survived World War II. He was actually born a French citizen. But as the German army advanced, he was, against his will, drafted into the German army. As a part of that, he would become part of the French underground network that was working to destroy the efforts of the Nazi Party. He would never talk about it in public, but those close to him appear to have told the story that it was organized that in an effort for the Germans to take part of France, he would be shot by his own countrymen to cover the idea, the reality that he was leaking information to them so that they would be able to stop the German press. He would be wounded. While the company he was leading of German soldiers would die, he would be wounded, taken, and would live underground until he would be able to be a free man after the war ended. Eventually, he would move to the States, and in 1962, much like in the early 1940s, the world found itself again in fear. In fact, it was October of 1962. If you're a historian, you know the moment we found ourselves, the world found themselves standing still for 13 days in what was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was during that 13 days that this former French/German soldier had remarried, or had married, had moved to Manhattan, New York. Was a songwriter. And then these 13 days, when the world stood still, he would write a song, "Do you hear what I hear?" You know that Christmas song? And the season fear, paralyzing even. He was asked to write a song of hope. And one day, walking through the park, back home from work, he saw a mother pushing her little children. And the song began to unfold in his mind. A song, if you haven't realized it, be a song of hope and peace. Today, not entirely unlike October of 1962, or 20 years earlier, people around the world, even people in our own country, and state, and city, and church, live with fear at the hand and burden of oppressors. There was a similar fear and burden of oppression that was being lived out in the early chapters of Exodus. Some of the individual pieces are different than what maybe some of you experienced, most of all of us probably. But just as there were in October of 1962 and in 42 and in 25, in the early moments of Exodus, people were burdened. They were disillusioned. They were living in fear. And Moses was given the responsibility to call by God to go and prove to the Hebrew people that God saw their burdens, that God saw their fear and their desperation. And so Moses and his brother Aaron would go and they would speak to the elders of the Hebrew people. And they would speak not just any word, but the words that God had told Moses at that burning bush, holy ground place, what to say. And then even in Moses' own doubts, signs that Moses was told. You remember the walking stick, the shepherd's staff, turned into a snake, for example. There are these signs that Moses was to do as a way to catch the people's attention so that they would understand, okay, this is God speaking, not just some lunatic coming back from the desert. And in Exodus 4, verse 31, it tells us this, that the people believed the words and the signs that Moses brought to them. Until they did it. And that's what Exodus 6:9 says. It got to the point that they did not listen to him because, why did they not listen? Their discouragement and harsh living. Have you ever been so discouraged in life that it was hard to believe God? I mean, like believing God was a roller coaster experience. You find yourselves maybe in moments going, okay, I was seeing of the goodness of God, and we seeing it, and then like, okay, in that moment, but then when you walk out the doors, you just kind of like, I don't know, God. See, when I'm reading the scriptures this week, what I realized is that it wasn't a question, do they believe in God? But do they believe God and the messenger God sent? Like, my guess is you're here this morning because you believe in God. But you don't always believe him. Sometimes you want to believe yourself a little bit too much. Or you believe other things that you're hearing, the feelings that you have, and they want to cancel out the idea of what God is saying. And it seems that that's the place, that the Hebrew people, it wasn't that they didn't believe in God, but because of their discouragement and harsh labors, they struggled to believe God. It would be just a chapter earlier, as it's broken up for us. We find that Pharaoh uses the exact same tactics that the serpent in the garden in Genesis 3 uses. You remember in Genesis 3 what the serpent says to Eve and maybe even Adam when the question is asked about the tree that they shouldn't eat? The serpent raises a question. Did God really say you can't eat of that one? And in Exodus 5:9, we find Pharaoh using the same tactic when he says essentially, Aaron and Moses are just peddling lies. So you can get out of they can get out of the situation they're in. Did God really say? They're just peddling lies. And the Hebrew people, caught in the middle of all of it, find themselves, like many today, discouraged. The stakes are raised, both by Pharaoh when he takes away those who were feeding them the straw that they would need to make the bricks and says, now you must continue to make bricks at the same pace, but I'm not going to provide anything for you. But it didn't just begin there, you see. It was their yeses along the way that caused them to this place as well. Now, let me ask you a question. What replaces hope for you? Like when you give up hope, when you become discouraged, what is it that creeps in?
Fear.
Why that? Your answer. Why that? Why is that what creeps in? Maybe it's apathy to add to the voices that were strong enough to speak out this morning. Apathy or a sense of I'm a failure. Maybe when you give up hope and you become ugly toward others. Like you just whine and complain and you wonder why people don't want to be around you because you just suck the energy out of them. What we find is that Moses and Aaron, they came to put on full display the lies of Pharaoh and the serpent, the evil one. And what I've been sitting with enough as I listen to what people say, like you people, and even me people, when I hear us talk, is if we don't slow down, we're going to become so discouraged that we'll be incapable of hearing God. And I think some of you are already there. Like you've given up on God. You believe in God, you just don't believe Him anymore. Because you've made your life so blasted busy and full. And you can blame it on a personality type. Whatever you want to do. but you never actually find yourself stopping and just being present with God. And you wonder why it's hard to believe. You wonder why you're so discouraged. Because you've potentially turned your life into the next best thing that I must achieve for, like the Hebrews did. You see, the Hebrews, they began as a people who were sheep herders. And when they moved to Egypt, you got to understand, like when they moved to Egypt, that wasn't the cool thing. It wasn't something that was thought of as a positive in Egypt. Sheep. And so they lived on the outskirts of any significant place. But as it goes, like maybe you, there was an opportunity for one to stop herding sheep and to make bricks and make a little bit extra. And that little bit extra, well, my goodness, that would provide that little bit nicer and that little bit more. And now generations removed from that first yes to a little bit more, they find themselves as an entire people group trapped by the idea of a little bit more. Do we need to start listing what is a little bit more for us, or are you afraid to say it? We just keep that into ourselves this morning, because you know what they are. It's the things that like you want, but then at the same time, sometimes you're ashamed of your want. And sometimes you want it and you justify, oh, because if I have, then I can do this and I can do that. And then it becomes a trap, because then it's not enough, and you have to now have the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next thing you know, you find yourself in such a discouraged place because you no longer believe in the words that God is saying to you, because you've not stopped enough to actually hear him speak in months. That's right. So the only thing you do hear is the God you call self. Moses and his brother Aaron are commissioned by God, way back, you remember, at that burning bush, to speak to the people and remind them who God is and ought to be. It's interesting to me, as I was sitting with it this week, I was thinking to myself, okay, I believe this confrontation of God happens throughout the Scripture. And one of the things that I teach my students is that Jesus uses parables to push back, to make it less easy on us to have a fight or flight response to the ways of God. That's one of the great reasons he uses the parables. Because you get caught up in the story and now you're thinking for yourself again. And so I was thinking about the teachings of Jesus, and I was trying to process which of the parables do I think most aligns with this moment, this issue that God is dealing with. And it led me to this one. Put that picture up there. It led me to this one. I don't think they had the bitches pretty like that and the light bulbs. I don't think it had been invented yet when Jesus was alive. But when I think about a banquet, I think this is a picture that like really might stir our attention and just kind of suck us into the story. And Jesus is recorded in both Matthew and Luke telling a parable of the great wedding banquet. See, the fascinating thing in this parable, Jesus tells us that a man, it was time for his son to be married, and they had sent out the RSVPs months earlier, and all of their friends and people in anticipation that they would come and celebrate this grand celebration. And when the time came, they sent out word and said, it's time to celebrate. Luke's version of the story, it does something interesting, slightly different than the way Matthew remembers Jesus telling it. But Luke says it this way, at least the translators that bring us the New International Version of the Bible, they said this is what it is. Jesus said, when he sent out word that it's time to celebrate, the people came up with excuses. Man, gotta love those kinds of friends. Both Matthew and Luke, as they remember Jesus telling this parable, they give us a list of the friends that didn't show. You know, one of them's excuse was work. Another's excuse was kind of a political, military thing. The interesting thing, the excuses were no reason to not celebrate. They were reasons not to be called into the military. But it was a reason that existed in their culture to not do something, and so they applied what was used in their culture to not do something as to not attend this banquet, which Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven, this is how he begins the parable, the kingdom of heaven is like. And so the father of the groom who's throwing the party, the banquet, the wedding banquet, he says to his servants, you know what? This is too big a deal for my son. So we're not going to have an empty hall. Go out and find whoever you can and invite him in. Just fill the place up, because I want my son, when he arrives with his bride, I want him to have the fullness of it. And so they go out and they find people. And Matthew tells us a part of the parable that Luke doesn't. And Matthew, as the parable comes to an end, and we find this peculiar situation. The father of the groom comes to somewhere at the table, and he sees somebody who's not dressed for the occasion. And he said, where's your clothes? You don't look right. And the basic response is, eh. And he calls the servant and says, get him out of here. I'm not going to have someone look like that when my son gets here. And I got to be honest with you. When I read the parable, I'm thinking, what in the world? Like, come on, God. Like if this is about the kingdom of heaven, like you welcome people in and you want anybody, you'll take it. Doesn't that seem kind of harsh? You invite them and then they're not dressed just right, so you kick them out until I learned something about the culture that Jesus was speaking from. That the story would be birthed out of. You see, unlike our wedding banquets, in that moment, you would have been given the clothes to wear. And the person said no thanks. I want it my way. Like, teaching of Jesus aligns with the calling of Moses and Aaron from God in Exodus. They're calling a people out of a way of bondage, a way of oppression. In some ways they fully understand that they're oppressed. In some ways they don't have a clue. Because one by one they gave themselves over to a different way of living than they once was. And if we're not careful, we'll be like them. But to give you some guidance, some hope, God is still calling you and me out. And the Bible gives us some things to help us understand. You see, in the kingdom of heaven, clothes are required. Not just any. But we're given the clothing. Exodus chapter 3. What happens? God clothes Adam and Eve. In Exodus, God, as he is calling the people out of Egypt, he is attempting to clothe them in a new way of being. In the wedding banquet parable that Jesus uses to talk about the kingdom of heaven, he says, you must be clothed a certain way or you will not be found by the Father. You will be distant, discouraged, oppressed. There's a couple of examples in the scriptures. I'm not going to unpack them this morning, but I want to just briefly give mine to them. This clothing from God, the fruit of the Spirit, and the armor of God. If you are not clothed with those, Jesus says, God says, away from me. I do not know you. You are not welcome. Kind of hard to get away from what Jesus says. And I wonder this morning if you could say that, for example, you're clothed in things like the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Do you wear, or you clothe in the armor of God? Paul understood them both to be really, really important. If you find yourself discouraged this morning, you take a look at your life and ask what you're wearing. I know discouragement happens. I don't mean that something like you're just basic discouragement and now I'm like suddenly I don't believe what God says. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you find yourself in this like regular place of discouragement where all you see and hear is everything but the voice of God, then I invite you to stop the stupid. And be silent before God. Please take just a moment. It's in my notes way earlier. But you know I sat it down. I just want you, no looking around. Just take about, we're just going to take about 30 seconds. And would you just, in these 30 seconds, just say, God, I'm listening. What do I need to hear from you? Do you hear what I hear? Are you overcommitted in the things of this world, leaving you undercommitted? Who God is. If you got caught up in thinking that you need that next thing of status for the wrong kingdom, do you hear what I hear? God to be saying, I hear your cry. My invitation to you is filled with hope and promise, a covering. Do you hear what I hear? God says,